Hello, everyone, and welcome to Just Jules, where I am just Jules. That's what I am. That's what I'll always be. Just Jules. That's it. Anyways, so I decided to be the sweatpants queen today. I'm totally wearing sweatpants and an old ass T-shirt from it was an anthology that I was a part of called Asylum. And so I stuck on this shirt today because it's a T-shirt made from the book. It's a Barrow Haven't Asylum. So it's a little old, but it reminded me like I haven't read you guys a story in a long time. So I figured this is my one thing about my writing is that it's improved dramatically over the past like 10 years. And so when I wrote these stories and stuff, I can read them and look back and be like, I can change that. I can make that sound prettier and better. And I was actually debating on whether or not to revisit my first novel and revamp that bad boy. It's like was I published it in 2013, so maybe well, I guess 2023 I could have done like a 10-year anniversary to it, but then again, at the same time, there's this old writer that I used to be friends with on Writers Cafe who told me two things. One, don't knock your old writing because you had to start somewhere. Because you start at a level and, as much as you want to revisit those things, that was your best at that point in time. So revisiting it, yeah, to bulk it up and stuff would be cool and stuff, but don't sell yourself short and think less of yourself just because your books now are better written than the ones you wrote before, because it also shows the evolution of your life as a writer and how you've changed and grown as a writer. Hey, hold on a second, I lost my pen. Not my pen, my lighter. Oh, no, I got one right here. Never mind. So, the second thing he told me was write down every thought. Like, let's say you have an idea, or let's say you have like a line in your head, like scraps of paper and stuff, writing poetry and stuff on. And I always kept mine. I've got scraps of paper and a folder and stuff of lines I wanted to add to poetry and stuff eventually. And I was debating on whether or not to keep them and stuff. And this old writer told me, this gentleman, and he's like, don't throw them away, because those thoughts you will never ever think again. Those are thoughts that you had in that moment and you will never replicate it. So hold on to those bits of writing, because then you can look back at those thoughts, at that writing, and you can either get inspiration from it, or you can just marvel at the idea that you thought that at one point in time. So there's a little motivation, I guess, there. But I figured I would sit here and I would read you guys a story, because I haven't done that in a long time. I've been sitting here writing my tail off. Actually, I gotta find the story. I gotta flip through this. I probably should have did this and had it prepped before I turned on the camera. And this one doesn't have a table of contents, unfortunately. Nope. But I'll read the back of the book to give you guys an idea of what this is about. It was Perfectly Poisoned Anthologies, and what I loved about working with some of these anthologies was that they were intertwined anthologies, which made them completely badass. And I think my favorite one to do was Siren's Lullaby, and I got to work with quite a few really, really good, talented authors and stuff. It was really cool. And what the intertwined anthology is that you have one idea, right? And each person writes a story that entails the other characters' that are written by the other people. So it's just immersive and intertwined. Well, I guess obviously it's intertwined because it's intertwined anthology, but all the stories go together and envelop the characteristics and stuff with the other characters and stuff. So it's like one world written by, you know, 6 authors, if I'm not mistaken. And this is something like that. Okay, this is called Asylum. The year is 1890. The Barrow Haven't Asylum is a private facility in rural England housing some of the country's wealthiest insane. Some inmates are truly insane, some banished by family members, others perhaps feigning insanity and with questionable agendas. And so this one is a 10 stories of shock and suspense. 10 different authors worked on this one. So this one is mine. This one is called The Voices of Reason. I peered into the darkness, waiting for an answer as I removed my hand from the wall behind me. When no one responded, I flipped over my bedsheet and carefully planted my bare feet on the cold hardwood floor. Hello? I asked again into the darkness. Is someone there? Just wait a minute before you say something you regret, a voice said. I reeled around and was met by the unusual threadbare and torn padding on the wall above my bed. My bed was tucked in the corner on the right side of the closet to the door. It wasn't my normal quarters either, just a room for isolation. The fear shot through my veins like ice. I looked down and my hands were shaking uncontrollably, each digit numbed from the cold. I felt a rise within the pit of my stomach as I clenched my eyes tight and put my fist to my temples. Stop it! Just stop it! I shot back. There was silence through my sobs as I lifted my feet from the floor and brought my knees to my chest, resting my head on the tops of them. I wasn't always like this. I remember a time when I didn't hear the voices. I remember the tea parties down in Clayton Bridge. I remember passing the university on my walks with a profound sense of wonder, not nearly as much wonder as I had found in the comfort of books. How I loved to read. I would sneak into my father's study and rifle through his books until one caught my eye, and I would study it in its entirety before returning it to the shelf. For a while I contemplated whether or not I should become a writer, but who would want to read a book written by a woman? My family was wealthy, which in turn brought about a myriad of different possibilities, ones that many women my age would be awed by, but it wasn't my way. My parents toyed with the idea of sending me to the university, but when Richard Evans suddenly appeared upon my father's doorstep, my life would soon be changed. He was tall, muscular, with thick, rich waves of ginger hair. He came from a reputable family. His father held a seat in Parliament. My father was bent on making a match between he and I. There were times when I felt like running away from it all, but not like this. No, not like this. I heard a rap on the door. You ready to come out and be a good girl? The voice said. Will you let me out? I fumbled with the folds of my sleep dress. I can't, not yet, not until you see the doctor. Which one? Eloise Fontaine. I sighed deeply. How much longer shall I be put away? As long as it takes for you to get better, and you can get better, I promise you. And when will that be? I chanced. There was a long silence, so long in fact that I thought the orderly had left. My heart sank with every quiet moment that passed. I'll be right here helping you on your journey to recovery. I then heard him shuffle past the door onto the next room. After some time I heard someone approach the door, followed by the sound of a key unlatching the bolt. The door opened a crack, and then there was a knock. Are you decent? The orderly asked, his voice chopped and plain. I wasn't allowed any dress to speak of, thus I am indecent, I replied. The door opened wider to reveal a sickly old hunchback man dressed in a white uniform. I'm here to escort you back to your quarters, the man stated, and then held out his arm to me while looking me in the eye. I hesitated, placing a hand upon the doorframe. There was an orderly who just denied my request to be released and returned to my quarters just moments ago. The man smiled. The lightly dusted ring of gray hair upon his head raised his brows, creating a series of deep, burrowing wrinkles upon his forehead. He seemed like a pleasant little man, eyes a hazel blue and his presence warm and inviting. I was told to escort you to your quarters. The doctor wants to see you. "He's going to get you," a soft voice whispered. "Where are you? Who is it? Who is there, and why do you torment me so?" A feeling of festering anger rose to the surface like pine tar on a boil. My heart hammered into my chest, nearly choking me out. The old man hesitated in the open doorway. "Are you all right, Miss Evans?" I looked around, my expression falling helplessly as I turned from side to side, searching from where the voice originated. "Did you not hear that? That voice. It's a man. He sounded ghastly, like he is choking out the words. I am regretful to say I heard nothing of the sort." "You didn't hear it?" The old man shook his head, causing his jowls to ripple down his neck. "Are you of sound enough mind to re-enter the community?" My eyes darted from one side of the room to the other, and then met his expression, which was of both concern and curiosity. It took a moment to answer as I squinted my eyes from the bright gaslights glowing against the white walls. "Yes," I mumbled. "I will be sure to notify Dr. Marsh and Dr. Fontaine. I'm sure he will be pleased with your progress. Don't do it again." The pressure of anger rose behind my eyes. I don't understand what it was I have done to deserve such treatment. The old man took a step back and gesticulated toward the door. "If you don't remember, then perhaps a few more days would jog your memory." I shook my head violently. "No, I'm well enough." His optimistic smile lightened my heart somewhat. "It's time for your bath." My heart dropped. "No, not there again. It's for the best, and it will help relax you." I turned and sat down in a nearby chair. There's nothing relaxing about cold water. Far better than the alternative, in my humble opinion. It's often used to treat people, relieves the pressure on the brain. I managed a smile that could be mistaken for a smirk. "The only pressure I feel is the confines of this room," I grumbled. "Nothing has made any sense since before I arrived. This all came upon me so suddenly, though Dr. Marsh had spoken with my family, to which he learned of the warning signs of my malady. This means, of course, I have been unwell for longer than previously thought. I grow weary," I replied, tucking a straight curl behind my ear. "I would much prefer a warm bath instead. There is a draft in the room." Hot water baths relax the muscles and is effective in treating poor circulation, joint, and muscle pain, whereas cold water hydrotherapy assists in stimulating the muscles and blood flow. We will have to see what Dr. Fontaine has to say about it. "I need warmth. You've only provided one quilt. Also, how is it you came to know so much?" I asked, cocking my head to the side. "Humph. I pay attention to the little details. I have been here for years, and I have come to learn a thing or two, though my world is unofficial. You've been here longer than you may think. I can neither diagnose nor treat you, rather assist in the handlings and care for the residents." "Residents?" "I don't see this place the way most do," he said. "It is a home for the weary and downtrodden, for souls who have been lost. For the people the world would prefer to forget," the old man replied, reaching a hand up to scratch the corner of his nose. "And that forgetting, the people can forget themselves or rise above it, perhaps create another sort of family. Dysfunctional, but what family isn't?" "I don't see myself mingling. I should keep my distance, otherwise—" But I didn't have the chance to finish. He gave me a cursory nod and disappeared out into the hallway. I followed after him, sidestepping the orderly with the ring of keys. He locked the door behind me. I was greeted by the soft sounds of wailing and a loud rhythmic thump 2 rooms down from the one I had stayed in. I whipped around when I heard a loud shriek down the hall. "Poor souls, I pity them," the old man said, his eyes darkening. I was not aware as to how long I had been in isolation, and I couldn't remember the events that led up to my commitment. I looked around the foreign room, to the bed behind me, where I collapsed into a pile of soft feather pillows. It was quite comfortable compared to the beds in isolation. I lay there with my legs splayed open, my back flat against the feather bed, and my hands over my head, toying with the edge of the tapestry of a woman riding a stallion, surrounded by woodland creatures. It was not a ladylike position, but it was certainly more comfortable than standing. "I see you," the voice called out again, jarring me from my thoughts. "Well, I can't see you, so you must not be there," I mumbled. There was no use in fighting the voices, a cacophony echoing into my brain, jostling unfamiliar memories of things I shouldn't know but do. I had tried to explain it to my family, Dr. Marsh, Dr. Fontaine, and the elderly hunchback who frequented the isolation rooms. The room itself was quaint, with the standard amenities for those who reside in the estate wing. I noticed the beige and floral wallpaper tearing in parts along the ceiling, a light layer of dust on the mahogany dresser that was once polished to a sheen. I had a vanity with an elegant bronze comb, mirror, and hairbrush set placed on a mirrored tray in the center. There were various bottles of perfume and oils lined up in front of where a swiveled mirror once stood, an exquisite vase imbued with gold flecks with freshly cut roses filling the air with its scent. I walked to the vanity, looked at the mirror next to the brush, and stiffened. I grit my teeth as I quickly flipped the tray over and laid the mirror face down on the polished surface, placing the hairbrush and comb next to it. Then thought the better of it. Instead, I brought the brush with me to the bed, sat down, and began brushing my long dark brown curls. I had my father's features, his broad chin, high cheekbones, with a slightly angular nose. My eyes I got from my mother, large seafoam green orbs that appeared to be too large for my face. Richard said it was my most captivating feature. So much can be seen and hidden within the eyes. Dr. Marsh commented on the lamenting eyes within the first week I had arrived. Your eyes reveal more about you than you think. I can look right into them and see right through the facade into the depths of your sorrow. Why do you think you are here? He asked, sitting back in his leather chair. He appeared to be in his late 30s, his hair the color of coal, with eyes as blue as the ocean, with a thick beard. His office was spacious, with his desk, like all the hardwood throughout the asylum, polished to a mirrored finish, almost to where I could see my reflection within it. I abhorred it. What is it about mirrors you dislike so? He continued, crossing and uncrossing his legs. I just don't like them, I replied flatly, my hands in tight little balls in my lap. Do you not enjoy looking at yourself? How is it you maintain your appearance without one? I have no need for one. They're dangerous. He furrowed his brow slightly and gave me an inquisitive look. How exactly are they dangerous? I sighed. You wouldn't understand. Miss Evans, why don't you humor me for a moment? Arabella, I corrected. Why should I have a reason behind my dislike? Humph, he snorted. I imagine by accident. There is always a root cause. You just have to learn how to backtrack and find the ever-elusive reason tucked away inside of you, preventing you from functioning as you should in society. I have done nothing to warrant a place in this asylum. He shook his head and dropped his fountain pen onto the desk, shooting a black droplet of ink on the file he had in front of him. He mumbled something and then shuffled through the paperwork. We have been over this for quite some time now. The staff and I have been making preparations for your treatment to calm your hysteria and subdue the voices you hear. I don't recall telling you any of the sort, I said, sitting rigid in the chair. I felt defensive, though I was unsure as to why. I simply don't understand my emotions, he finished. We've spoken at length about... It's not about my emotions, Doctor. I told you it is something else entirely. It's what I've been trying to explain to you and all the doctors since my husband brought up his concerns. No one seems to understand or listen, just as my family refused. I shook my head somberly and lowered my gaze to my wringing hands. It felt defeating, especially with the way he looked at me, that skeptical look, the look he probably gave all his patients after their families discredited them. I had discussed with your husband at length regarding the struggles you've been having, and one of his primary concerns were the voices you hear. Do they tell you to do things such as harm yourself or others? I didn't answer. I couldn't. Richard told him enough to where Dr. Marsh had already made up his mind. What could he possibly do to assist me when he already had the information he needed from my husband, whose last words were to me, I have the need of a disobedient, hysterical wife. Thus I was plucked from my comfortable world of freedom into an institution with every room locked and sealed. I made my way to the common room after I had freshened up and dressed in my private quarters. A pot of fresh boiling chamomile tea awaited me on a silver platter in the dumbwaiter upon my return. I dropped a lump of sugar, stirred the hot liquid with an ornamented teaspoon, and collapsed onto the daybed next to my window, spilling the tea upon my bodice. I quickly grabbed a handkerchief and cleaned up the mess as best as I could. Books lined each shelf, and it appeared more were added to the collection since I was confined. Richard must have mentioned my love of reading. It was my only means of escape, and seemed for a time to quiet the voices haunting me. I already knew what they were and how they came to be, though my husband insisted the books I so adored were the culprit of my condition. It seemed he had spared me a kindness before his departure, which made me wonder when or if I would ever see him again. His family, I assumed, had a hand in imprisoning me here, believing me to be a stain on the family name. They were not keen on the match, but allowed us to marry for the love rather than for social status, as opposed to my father's intentions. I came from a wealthy family, as did he, but his family had high standing in politics. A hysterical wife would only tarnish their reputation, and as the unwilling participant in the charade, I had no other option. My family would have probably done the same, I reckoned. I had heard whispers of other asylums with ghastly conditions and mistreatment of the patients, rigorous bloodletting, blistering, and much like these asylums, the residents were refused leave as we were stripped of our independence. No longer would I be spending a holiday in Paris or Rome, no longer allowed to frequent the boutiques with my closest friends or attend tea with my mother as we did our stitching. No more walks around Clayton Bridge on breezy summer afternoons watching the townsfolk milling about. I rather enjoyed watching people. Sometimes I would be sitting on my favorite bench in the Queen's Park, watching the children and young couples have their family picnics, sweethearts walking arm in arm, and the elderly woman knitting while her husband fed the swans. I missed the fresh scent of the air, the smell of nature's clean after a hard rain. Yet here I was watching it from behind a sheet of glass and wrought iron bars intricately constructed to form a filigree pattern. In spite of that, it was deceit, designed to hold us in indefinitely with no hope for escape, a prison for the afflicted affluent. Richard said I had gone mad, hysterical, disobedient. The voices were but a figment of my imagination, though I had heard them as secrets told in whispered confidence. Sometimes I would hear screaming, crying, wailing, murmurs of love and adoration. I vaguely remember what he said to me before he shuffled me off to this place. I heard his voice in my head speaking to me without saying anything. His lips didn't move. It was just like that all the other times, a swarm of noise ringing through my head while I braced myself against the wall to keep from fainting. Most of the time I collapsed, temporarily blinded by the emotion elicited by the words. I could feel it in my bones as I did now, and it frightened me. I wanted to get away. I wanted to escape, but there was nowhere to go other than to my quarters. But I couldn't inter myself there forever. I had already tried and was forced out and into the common room. Books lined the shelves along the front entrance, and I regarded the women working on their stitching, while another elderly woman stared at a blank spot on the wall. I found her captivating for some reason, a calm around her I didn't feel with anyone else. I wished I knew what her voice sounded like, why she was sent there. Why was she as hysterical as I? Was she forgotten as I, given up on life and the world around her as she wastes away in luxury? She was an elderly woman who always dressed in a simple nightgown, with her veiny hands clasped tightly in her lap. I made to sit next to her as I waited for our evening meal. First there was tea, followed by our decadent evening meal of steak and kidney pie, with a bowl of mash, pear pudding, and persimmon pie, all the while listening to a string quartet and a small choir perform the songs of Henry VIII. I could hear them tune their instruments from the common room. Then there was a small man called Silas Brentwood. He was unusually short, with dark brown hair, the color of briarwood. His eyes were small and close-set, with a nose slope one could slide upon. His lips were morbidly large, and when he spoke it was nothing but an incoherent mumble most of the time, but he could talk. Despite his features, what struck me about him was how childlike he appeared to be. But whenever we were in the same room, he would follow me with his eyes, which was quite unsettling. It made me wish Richard were with me. I always felt safe with him, even if it was only by proximity, as he'd sit in his leather chair, pipe in hand. The one part I loved about him was his thick ginger hair. How I loved to run my hand through it while he kissed me in secret places concealed within the dark of night. I watched from the corner of my eye as Silas circled the room, running his fingertips across the ornate window frames, cut to form a vine of roses. He fingered them for a while, turning his downcast eyes upon me. I wanted to scream at him, throw the platter of buttered pastries at him, anything to get his crawling eyes off of me. I knew what lay within his thoughts. I felt it within the ball that formed in my stomach, a warning. He wasn't to be trusted, especially while alone. His face disgusted me to where I could not look upon him without recoiling. The way he ran his chubby fingers across it softly as though imagining it was my flesh. I shuddered and turned my attention to the old woman and sat beside her on a crushed velvet chair. I looked to her and carefully reached over and tucked her hair out of her face behind her ear. Her hair was coarse and gray, but this gentle kindness elicited an extraordinary response. She turned and looked at me with a soft smile upon her lips, before turning her head again to the blank spot on the wall. "You are quite lovely this evening. I hope you're feeling well. I rather enjoy your company. What is your name?" I said pithily. She didn't answer, merely readjusted her hands, rubbing her thumbs against the side of each. "She not talk you," Silas mumbled. What was that, Silas?" one of the women asked from the corner of the room without looking up from her stitching. "It may be best you keep to yourself." But I like," he replied, glancing in my direction. "I don't think that is very appropriate, do you? You should not look at her the way you do." "Do you remember what happened the last time?" the woman asked. She wore a long periwinkle skirt in the swooping form of a tulip in bloom that was snug over her hips and flared dramatically to a wide hem. As opposed to a corset, she wore a pastel blue blouse. Her bodice was loose, with an angular patchwork of lace, pearls, and glittering jewels. The other woman wore similar attire, though donning a royal purple skirt and bodice with a contrasting white blouse, lace at the cuffs, and a high collar, stiff and straight. I couldn't imagine how she could move her neck, let alone breathe in such dress. "Silas, it is almost time to dine. Why don't you run along and dress appropriately?" she instructed, looking him up and down. He wore his undergarments and a long white shirt that nearly brushed the tops of his knees. "Fine," he responded inordinately loud, and stumbled away, obedient to her command. How is it he listens to you?" "I have been here for years. From my understanding, he was discarded as a child due to his malady, left upon the doorstep of the parsonage in Clayton Bridge, and was subsequently sent here to reside and live out his days in the asylum," the woman in the periwinkle skirt said, her voice laced with bitterness. "And what of you?" I asked. "What of me?" She set down her stitching in the lap of the other and raised from the settee. "What of you?" I looked down and suddenly embarrassed in my forwardness. "My apologies, madam. I meant no offense. I merely wanted to know your name, though admittedly I was curious about her diagnosis. It was strange swimming within a pool of individuals struggling to breathe in a world with no air for the damaged. Trying to circumvent their diagnosis without knowing or understanding them would be a certain challenge. I craved depth as it gave me better insight into the individuals surrounding me. It was why I asked Richard so many questions whilst reading a book. In books I could easily understand the viewpoints of the characters, but their different perceptions of the world. But speaking with the living brought me great discomfort if I was unfamiliar. "Would you be so kind as to answer me a question?" the woman in the dark skirt asked, and continued without waiting for my response. "My name is Philomena Scarlett, and," she motioned to the woman in the periwinkle skirt, "her name is Constance Bradford. We had heard, as there are whispers here, you don't fancy your reflection. Is that why you were brought here?" It had only been a few weeks since my arrival, and I hadn't bothered to ask anyone's name. I assumed the residents were as in the dark as I was about each other. I learned of Silas as the older orderlies had a tendency of raising their voice to him during his fits of opposition. The residents appeared standoffish to me, foreign yet oddly similar. It was disconcerting, the directions I was being pulled from. On one hand, we were all the same damaged people our families wanted to hide. Yet some of the residents lacked the proper decorum as some of us had learned, and instead relied upon their compulsory actions to garner attention instead of joining in polite conversation. I gripped the arm of the chair and placed my hand upon the wall behind me as I made to rise. "Help me, I'm trapped." I quickly sat back down. "Did you say something?" "What do you mean you're trapped?" I asked, squinting my eyes in the dim lighting. The voice was different from Philomena, and certainly did not sound like Catherine. It sounded elderly, like a woman whose voice had grown hard and hoarse. I knew it couldn't have been them, as I hadn't seen their lips move in the slightest. The elderly woman behind me couldn't have said anything, as she was struck dumb. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean. I haven't said such a thing. My apologies. I must have misheard." The woman looked at me quizzically. each narrowing their brow, searching my face for any indication of what afflicted me, imagine. "Why do you not fancy mirrors?" Philomena demanded. I sighed loudly, bowing my head to examine the plush carpeting. It had a floral design with such intricate details, I could have sworn I was admiring a painting. The tapestries upon the walls depicting cherubs in a field of grass were equally as detailed. I leaned forward, kicking off my slippers, and rested my elbows upon my knees, my hands cupping my chin as I buried my big toe into the soft carpeting. I simply do not fancy mirrors or any reflective surface. I didn't bother looking up as I had seen the expression many times before. It was one of curiosity mixed with caution. Why wouldn't a woman such as I admire myself in front of a mirror? It was precisely the reason why I never wore my hair up in any sort of style, rather let my long tresses fall to my shoulders, my curls remarkably soft to the touch. I found myself twirling the loose ringlets framing my face with my fingertips. When the two women said nothing, I looked up to find them gone, startling me out of my thoughts. I looked from the old woman to Silas, who was making his way to the hallway leading to the dining room. I rose from the chair and walked to the fireplace, next to which stood a long case clock which read 35 past 6. Our meals were prepared at precisely 7 and 9 in the morning for breakfast, for lunch between noon and 2 o'clock, and supper from 30 past 6 until 8 o'clock in the evening. Tea was generally served twice, an hour and a half past breakfast, and again at lunch. There were other times when we would enjoy evening tea in small groups or in our quarters. I preferred mine in my quarters. I feared the more time spent with individuals of this place would affect my own struggles. I couldn't bear to think of taking upon myself a job as one Dr. Marsh had. I had an uncanny feeling whenever I walked into a room. I could sense an energy building within the room, depending upon who was in it. My problem wasn't my own emotions, it was of others. I absorbed the feeling and made it my own. Speaking with individuals directly regarding their trials and tribulations caused such a paradox within me. I could feel their pain as though it were my own, causing me great stress, yet it was comforting to know I wasn't alone in my pain. However, after my internment here, I had felt nothing but anguish in every room. I walked to where Silas had stood and found the tapestries covered the window to block out the cold of winter. How had it arrived so quickly? I pulled the tapestry aside, resting my free hand upon the wall, and saw the windows had iced over. "Which way did he go?" "I'm not sure. There's blood everywhere. Follow where it leads. He must be down here." I let the tapestry slip from my hand as I quickly backed away and turned around, frantic to see who was speaking. What was I hearing? Had I read it somewhere and was merely repeating it in my head in different voices? Was it my imagination, the culprit of my fear? I felt a knot form in the pit of my stomach as I thought to admit my fears to Dr. Fontaine along with the voices I've heard. Should I carry with me a sheet of paper and a fountain pen to write down what I heard them say? The voices were of frantic men. I could almost hear the sounds of their feet as they stomped through the room and fade into the hallway. "Blood everywhere," one of the voices had said. I could sense a familiar instinctual feeling form within my stomach that gradually rose into my throat in a rush. I wasn't sure why or how I knew. It was a deep-rooted feeling I couldn't ever ignore. I had the same feeling before Richard even mentioned Barrow Haven Asylum. I knew he would send me somewhere. I was just unsure as to where. Thus I believed the worst. Although I had the feeling something was amiss, most times I could guess what it was, though it still sent a shock right through me, even though I knew it was coming. I could feel my heart beating in the back of my throat as I knelt and picked up the edge of the carpeting. Much to my dismay, the shiny lacquer and stain upon the floor appeared to have been scrubbed off, leaving only a trace evidence of it ever being there. As I pulled the carpeting back further, it revealed the edge of what could have been a large dark brown stain. Abruptly and without knowing, my mind flashed to the swiveled mirror in my parents' bedroom, which took me off guard. I shook the image from my mind as quickly as it arrived. Looking to the open hallway, I waited a moment to make sure I didn't hear footsteps, and pulled the carpeting back as far as I could. What I saw was discomforting, a large dark patch of old blood that stained the floor. "I have spent hours scrubbing this floor, yet the stain persists. Perhaps a throw rug would suffice to cover it up. Who was it?" "A nurse." "A nurse? In the asylum? Murdered?" I let the rug slip to the floor and quickly flipped it back over. Strangely enough, I wasn't particularly concerned about hearing the voices than I was what they had said. Something dark and sinister had happened in Barrow Haven, though I had only pieces of the puzzle. I daren't speak of it to anyone, especially the physicians, especially Dr. Fontaine. Are you coming for dinner? Where are your shoes, my lady? The hunchback orderly from the isolation room asked. He appeared in the doorway and softly knocked. I looked down to my bare feet, dragged them across the floor, and slipped on my footwear. I'm just about ready. I was merely regarding the tapestries. They're quite lovely. Indeed they are, handmade in the Orient and shipped here exclusively. There aren't any like it in the world, he replied, his voice raspy. He cleared his throat and put a hand upon the door frame and flinched. Are you well, sir? I asked, cocking my head to the side. He smiled. Yes, I am quite well. You, on the other hand, should make your way to the dining hall. I hear they have peach cobbler and Belgian chocolates for dessert. He turned and disappeared into the hallway, bringing back a wheeled chair, I assume for the old dumb woman. Wait, I called out as I moved toward the hallway. He reappeared with his brows raised. I never caught your name. Benedict Whitehall. I've worked in this asylum for over 30 years. My wife and I, she is a nurse. Lovely woman. She had a love of books, as do you, so I've heard. You two will get along splendidly. His blue eyes appeared watery, and I could tell by the way the cords tightened in his neck that he was holding back. He must really love his wife. With a quick nod, he bowed his head and disappeared again, while I stared at a spot on the rug hiding a secret I was soon to discover. I had my evening tea in my quarters, as I didn't feel the need to socialize. What the voices had told me weighed heavily on my mind like a large stone in my chest. It felt like a weight upon my shoulders, yet I unconsciously had them raised. I tried to roll my shoulders, to loosen the muscles, but still found myself wound up like a thick coil. Is everything all right, miss? A gentleman asked. He wore a tailored wool smoking jacket with golden buttons lining the front. That seems to be the common question in this establishment, I replied as I toyed with my food with my silver. Humph, I find myself being asked quite a bit. I was admittedly observing you. Trifling curiosity, he replied. Huh, am I that obvious? Quite obvious. His dark blue eyes surveyed the room for a moment before he looked back to me. I was wondering if this seat was taken. He gestured to this chair next to me, and I shook my head. No, you're welcome to sit, but I can't imagine myself being good company. I took a bite of mash and enjoyed the buttery flavor. Aside from the antics of some of the residents, namely Silas, it was a quiet evening, but the contradiction was in my own mind. The noise of over 70 people as they quietly ate their meal, drinking small glasses of a new fountain soda, Coca-Cola. Silas was in the corner on the floor with his plate in front of him. He stirred his mash with his finger and licked it off. If it fell to the ground, he would pick it up with his 2 fingers and stuff it in his mouth. Unsavory table manners reminded me of the savages I had heard about in the old America before it became industrialized. I had heard rumors of steam-powered motor cars being manufactured there as well, and wondered what it would have been like to drive one. There were a handful of manufacturers producing motor cars in England, but seeing one was a rarity unless one was wealthy. I remember Richard speaking about it with his associates at length during the evening smoke and scotch. We could very well afford it, but it was something that had been put off for other reasons, my commitment. The man sat down and regarded me keenly. What ails you, my friend? I keep hearing that question, I replied. There was silence for a while before I left my plate. My apologies. I'm feeling weary and prefer to lay down. Perhaps we can continue this conversation another time. The man nodded and got up from the table, as did I. I grabbed my white gloves I had placed next to my plate, gathered up my skirt, and stood. Dexter Harvey Lodway, he said, holding out his hand. I reached up to grasp his, but he lifted back the back of my hand and kissed it gently. His lips felt like silk, and I was overcome by an unexpected swoon. He was a rather handsome man, with full lips, eyes like star sapphires, and built more for manual labor than a rich aristocrat. How long have you been here? I asked. He shoved his hands in his pockets, pulled out a pocket watch, and checked the time. "I've been here roughly 15 minutes," he replied and chuckled. I couldn't help but smile. It was the first time I had since I arrived. Come to think of it, it was probably the first time I had smiled since long before I arrived. As much as Richard tried, he could not elicit a genuine smile from me. I had to force myself to smile, and oftentimes he saw right through it. I remember toward the end he became enraged over my antics, so he called them fits. He tried to take my books, but I wouldn't allow it. For a period of time I was not myself. I was someone else living some other life. Help me forget, help me focus, and he had wanted to take that all away. I thought of the extra books I found in my room after I had been released from the confines of the isolation wing. I still couldn't recall what it was I did to warrant a room there, nor was I aware of how long I had spent in isolation. Thankfully, no one had mentioned anything to me other than the usual questions asked. "Thank you. I needed to smile. It feels foreign to me." "Why is that? What reasons are there not to smile?" I looked at him quizzically. "Have you not noticed where we reside? Look around you." His lips curled in a half smile as he regarded me further. "What you see are lost souls, damaged people, sick people, and people with demons plaguing them, each fighting their own battles. What I see is hope." I chuckled. "Hope? In a place like this? Some have been here for years, and they live as though they hadn't left their life of wealth behind them. I don't think you understand what a privilege it is to be here." I shifted my weight as my legs grew tired from standing. I was tempted to sit back down and continue the conversation, but the other part of me wanted to escape from the madness. I wasn't mad. I heard voices, but I was not mad in the sense others were, like Silas and whatever ailed Catherine and Philomena. I looked around the room to see if I could spot them. They were in the corridor leading to the west wing, arm in arm. I wanted the chance to speak with them again. I suppose what I truly yearned for was to be accepted and invited into a fold of friends and acquaintances. Perhaps this man was but my means of assimilation. "I don't mean to keep you, but you should know there are good people here, people who can be your friend if you let them. You have been here roughly 2.5 weeks, and yet you still haven't bonded with anyone. I find that worrisome, as we need each other." I shook my head. "I'm afraid you are wrong, Mr. Lottaway. Please call me Dexter." "Dexter," I began again, "I don't think you're correct in the assumption. I don't want to bond with anyone. To be honest, I find great discomfort in socializing." "Now, why is that?" I thought for a moment. "It is because of what I hear." "And what is it you hear? You certainly have questions, don't you?" His smile turned into a grin. "I suppose you are correct. I thrive upon understanding the depth of an individual. Who they are and how they came to be allows me to better understand and assist the individual." "Isn't that the physician's job?" I asked, but was amazed that he felt the same way about people as I. "I believe we can help each other just as much as the physicians, more so. We can learn and understand, even empathize with each other, as no one knows the true struggle we face better than the lot of us." I pursed my lips as I thought about what he said. "I must be off, milady. I would like very much to speak to you at length. You're very intriguing. I can sense a part of you holding back. There's something below the surface of what you admit to." I had a deep suspicion he already knew. He gave me a knowing smile and shuffled off in the direction of the banquet table where assorted chocolates were arranged on fine silver platters. I had an appointment with Dr. Fontaine the next morning. She was a formidable woman with hair a deep shade of watered-down brandywine. She had a loud, husky voice and strung her sentences together as one would string a strand of freshwater pearls. She usually had her hair done up in a tight bun on top of her head, with loose ringlets poking out from it. There were two particular ringlets hanging short on the back of her neck, hanging behind her ear. She wore spectacles intended to tap her fountain pen in an irritating fashion while she spoke. As large as she was in circumference, she wasn't at all ugly, rather homely. Her office was papered in an elegant mother-of-pearl, with deep red roses crawling up the walls. Her desk was made from heavy oak, polished. Centered in the midst of it was a disarray of books and files. I took a seat on a divan in the corner and descended into the soft feather pillows that laid upon it. "You do that quite often," she said, chortling. "It is rather a comfortable spot." Why don't you take a seat in the chair in front of my desk? It's better to look upon you while speaking rather than you laying supine as though disinterested in your recovery. I got up begrudgingly and slumped into the soft velvet cushioned chair, which squeaked as I moved to readjust my skirt. I anticipated a walk through the gardens as soon as our meeting was at an end, so I opted to don a navy blue top and a white skirt with a black silk sailor tie trailing down my bosom. I had a few loose corsets, but I chose not to wear them as they restricted movement and the ability to breathe. Instead, I wore a simple bodice ornamented with soft blue jewels complementing my blouse. Let us try this again, Arabella. The last time we met didn't go so well. What do you mean? I asked, and my mind immediately went to my period in the isolation wing. I cannot remember what exactly happened. She raised her brows, shuffled the papers on her desk, and began taking notes. I saw my file in the daguerreotype photos they had taken of me upon my arrival, along with the series of cartes de visite I had collected and brought with me. For what purpose she had them, I don't know. I want to talk about these cartes de visite. I would prefer not to. Some of them appear strangely blurred, while others depict those of the dead. It's not uncommon to have snapshots of such as these, I replied, crossing my legs. Your husband found it peculiar, as these are not relatives of yours. The ones that are blurred are quite unsettling. I bit my lip, twisted my fingers, and gripped the arms of the chair. I find it fascinating. You find death fascinating? Why? She asked, placing her arms on the desk. She leaned forward, interested in my response. I've heard voices, I managed in a quiet voice. I could barely hear myself speak as I uttered the words. I didn't quite catch that. I can hear people talking, people who aren't really there, or maybe they are in some other life. What do these voices tell you? Do they tell you to harm yourself as you did the last time you were in my office? I tried searching back into my memory to remember the incident, but couldn't. You really don't remember, do you? It's understandable considering your condition. Did you become someone else? Only when I'm reading books, I replied, still gripping the chair. I had no idea as to why I admitted to her the darkness within me. I was unpredictably troubled. I wasn't sure as to what I was doing at times. Do you remember what you did the last time you were here? She asked again. I shook my head and could feel the tears burning behind my eyes. No. Dr. Fontaine leaned back in her chair, drumming her fingers upon the desk. You started screaming at the walls over there. She gestured to the left of her office, toward the window overlooking the garden. I wished I was there instead of being trapped in this office by my own admission. You began banging your head upon the wall. We had to have the orderlies come to fetch you and bring you to the isolation wing. We had no choice other than to put you in a straitjacket until you calmed down. You were in there a week, shortly after you arrived. I feared the worst. You'd be in danger to yourself and others. I believe you are a good woman who is deeply troubled. I'm here to help you find the root cause of that said ailment and guide you through it. There is the possibility of release upon a review on my part. Sadly, I must tell you, it appears you are showing signs of hysteria, which may make it difficult to leave the institution. Do you believe, like your husband does, that your books are to blame for your condition? You focus on books because you are concentrating and being in the moment for that particular story. You need to stay in the moment in real life. Do you find yourself thinking deeply at times? I'm not sure what you mean, as everyone thinks deeply at times. What I mean is, do you ever get trapped inside your head and forget the world around you without reading a book? I pursed my lips together tightly, pressing my tongue to the roof of my mouth as I nodded. I wasn't going to tell you about all this. I'm afraid no one seems to understand the position I am in. The voices, they seem to be coming from the walls. She was quiet for a moment as she jotted down a few notes. Well, we have a few options for you, Dr. Fontaine said, closing the file. There is hydrotherapy, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Talking through your troubles is where I come in. I am also going to prescribe a series of medications that will help subdue the voices you hear. I wanted to start with opium. However, I would like to try paraldehyde first. We can adjust accordingly. I'm also prescribing chloral hydrate to aid in the stomach upset paraldehyde often triggers. I felt a sudden chill in the air, as though a window were open. I looked to it and noted frost had formed around the edges of it. It almost looked feathered. It appeared winter had come sooner than I anticipated. Just yesterday it rained, and now frost? I wasn't so sure if I wanted to walk through the garden and brave the cold, or if I should remain indoors locked in my quarters as I bury myself in a book. I had my eye on Lippincott monthly magazine I saw discarded on the floor in the dining hall. I had flipped through it and noted an interesting story by Oscar Wilde, The Picture of Dorian Gray. My husband's associate, Isaac Keaton, had spoken of it years ago, and it piqued my interest, yet I'd never had the chance to read it. I had forgotten about it and was amused to find the magazine discarded the way it was. I I had H.G. Wells's Time Machine stowed away on the bookshelf in my room. It was a hard decision between the two. I wanted an escape more so now than ever. I could feel my nerves rattling around throughout my body and noticed my hands trembling. I felt a snag with my fingernails. I brushed my fingertips over the top of my skirt, flattening it out. I used my teeth to pull it off and spit out the nail. Unladylike, but Dr. Fontaine didn't seem to notice, or if she had, she didn't comment. I pressed my fists between my legs, trying to force the shaking to stop. I rose from my seat and walked to the window and pressed my finger to an open space between the ornate wrought iron filigree creeping up the window. I made a small fingerprint in the frost on the window and watched as the condensation dribbled down. It's winter already. Indeed it is. We hadn't had much of an autumn, did we? It's the first frost of the season, isn't it? I asked, as I pressed my fingers to the window again. I felt nothing but the cold beneath my skin and a small trickle of water forming beneath it. She pushed herself away from her desk and walked around toward me. She placed a soft hand on my shoulder as I continued looking out. There will be plenty of time for you to go out and live your life, just as soon as you are well enough to do so, I assure you. I haven't heard of others. There are, but they're the ones who strive to heal, rather than the ones who are beyond saving or ones who prefer to remain instead of being discharged to their families. Ongoing care is needed to assist in the transition. How would you determine whether someone is well enough to leave or not? What if I'm beyond saving? Shh, she quieted me, squeezing my shoulder. We mustn't think of that, dear child. You must maintain your strength and integrity during your stay. I believe you are different from many of the others. I believe you want to get better. Yes, of course, I replied, but inside I didn't feel too sure of myself. As I walked through the threshold of my room, I stopped myself, placing a hand upon the doorframe. A cacophony of voices sizzled in my ears. I just wanted to help, I heard a young man's voice call out rather vehemently as it cut through the noise of the crowd of people in my head. Is something wrong? Dr. Fontaine's voice sounded far away, as though she were a world away. Perhaps she was at the moment. I bowed my head and shook it violently as I tried to force the voices away. Not here. Not now. Not while I'm in the office again. Isolation. The thought occurred to me, and I couldn't help but wonder if this was a similar episode as I had when I first arrived. Bits and pieces came back to me in a slight trickle as I recognized the voices. I'm fine. I just feel rather faint. I skipped breakfast this morning, and I'm feeling unwell. That can surely be remedied, my poor dear, her faraway voice said. I can speak with the cook to see if he can whip something up for you. You may be in for a treat, she said and winked. I managed a curt smile, and as I thanked her, my voice sounding stuffy in my ears. I appreciate it, thank you. I can't help but show concern. You had similar feelings while you were in my office last time. I was worried it was happening again. She breezed past me, and I slowly walked after her, using the walls as a guide to steady myself. The voices came in waves, causing me a spell, nearly bringing me to my knees. I placed my hands on the tops of them and leaned forward. I could hear a crackling in my ears as my hearing slowly returned, and I was able to raise myself to a standing position again after a few moments. I think I will call the nurse. No, I said a little too quickly. No, I am well enough. There is no need. Her expression showed concern, her head cocking to the side as she regarded me with sad eyes. She really did seem to genuinely care about her patients. Maybe she was right. Maybe I could overcome what ails me, to learn how to push the voices back. The question she had, were the origins of the voices, and for that I hadn't an answer. Perhaps, though, talk therapy we would be able to find the root cause of my hysteria. The word struck me as insulting, as I didn't believe the voices originated from nothing. I had a nagging feeling they were far more than that. I was instructed to return to my quarters once I had finished breakfast. I ate my breakfast alone in the empty dining hall and found the silence quite pleasant, though I was disappointed I hadn't run into Dexter Harvey Lotway. I ran his name over in my mind and replayed our conversation. The way he smiled and the cool, collected way he had of handling himself made me wonder what it was about him that caused him to end up in a place like this. I had heard rumors of those who were cut off from their inheritance by using institutionalization, as their families put them away to accrue more money from the estate by taking their share. It certainly seemed plausible, but then again, Catherine and Philomena seemed to have their faculties. Were they as hysterical as I, or did we suffer in different ways? I mulled it over as my fork hovered over my poached eggs. I heard a scuffling from behind me. I turned to look, and my heart dropped. It was Silas. I cringed. I could see him thumping the wooden support pillar behind me near the banquet table. The room was spacious enough, with tall cathedral ceilings. The walls were made of solid oak, stained a rich brown and lacquered to a shine. Mirrors inlaid the walls surrounding the dining hall, giving it the illusion of enormity, as though it needed it. There were a series of ornate and handcraft hardwood tables spotting the hall, each with lace doilies, silver flatware and cutlery, and lead crystal vases of freshly cut flowers. It would be the last we saw of fresh flowers for the season, I imagine. They had probably been cut the day prior, as the ones in the garden had borne the brunt of the frost and were wilted as a result. Winter. I remember the walks I had during the first snowfall. I remember making snow angels in front of the estate we lived in. Richard used to laugh at my childish antics until eventually tired of them, as his demands from work seemed to hold him back. I remember the last snow angel I made and how irate he seemed because of it. He didn't need to say a word. The expression on his face told it all. I remember how they filed out of the house and observed me, his associates and government officials. I had humiliated him in front of all of them. I would never forget the look on Richard's face when he saw what I was doing. I remember quickly getting up and brushing myself off as they retreated into the house. That was when it happened. The moment I placed my hand upon the wall to steady myself as I took off my boots, the voices began. It started as a light hush and quickly grew into shouting as the months progressed. The moment I threw the dining room chair across the room was the beginning of the end for me. I remember his frustration, his anger, embarrassment. As much as he had reassured me of his love for me, he set me here in spite. I felt the tragedy within me as my dreams of being his wife and the mother to his children unraveled before my eyes. He had me locked upstairs, never to come out until the moment the carriage arrived to take me to the asylum. I cried when he left, as the nurses scurried me along. I could feel him slipping away from me, like I was trying to collect the remnants of a flake of snow out from a droplet of water. My attention wandered back to Silas, who remained at the pillar watching me, scratching at the wood. "Can I help you, Silas?" "I hear words." I was momentarily taken aback. "You hear words?" "I see. I feel," he mumbled through his large lips. They reminded me of a catfish, the way they expanded across his face. He was in his usual attire, undergarments, with the long shirt over top that covered him halfway down his thighs. His legs were unusually skinny and full of dark, twisted hair that appeared animal-like. It wasn't the way he looked, as it was the way he studied me. "I feel you. You are here. Wall." He looked around the room as he stepped away from the support pillar. "Silas, why don't you find something to do in the common room?" The old hunchback man appeared in the hallway. "Let this lovely young woman finish her breakfast in peace." Silas knocked on the wood with his knuckles and pushed himself away from it, stumbling toward the orderly. The orderly's face softened as he turned his attention to me. "How are you enjoying your breakfast, milady?" I picked up the teapot, still steaming from the heat, and poured it in my cup, with 2 lumps of sugar, and stirred it delicately. I picked up my fork and cut a small portion of egg and set it aside, exchanging it for the blueberry scone with clotted cream. "I never caught your name, sir." Benedict Whitehall." "How are you enjoying your breakfast?" He wore the standard white shirt and loose dark trousers his position required. "Heh," I replied with a mouthful of scone. I put 2 fingers to my lips and closed my eyes as I tried to finish the bite. The man. "Silas. How long has he been here?" Benedict shoved his hands in his pockets and ambled over until he was standing right beside me. He gestured to the empty chair next to me. Would you mind if I joined you? You most certainly can, I replied. As much as I desired to be alone, I much preferred Benedict's company over Silas. Silas seemed to be a harmless creature, but there was something about the way he looked at me that rattled my bones. Benedict cleared his throat and regarded me as I ate my food. For a while we remained quiet. It was a comfortable silence. I felt as though I could trust this man. I let my mind wander as we sat in the quiet with the only sound of the scratching of my fork against the plate. My mind went back to the stain I found on the floor underneath the thrown rug in the common room. I thought back to the voices and what they said. Blood everywhere. To the moment I heard the voice in the isolation room. He's going to get you. But who? Who is going to get me? It felt like a warning. It was a warning. Then a thought occurred to me. Mr. Whitehall, do you recall? Silas is a simple soul. He has been here for nearly as long as I have. And that was 30 years, you said? 33 to be exact. He arrived 3 years after I started working. And your wife, she's a nurse here. I don't believe we've been introduced. Then again, I haven't been here long. He sat back in the chair and I could hear the creaking of the wood behind his weight. She's around. I run into her on occasion. You're assigned to different wings, aren't you? Yes, I suppose we are. About Silas, though. He's harmless. You needn't worry about him. He's just curious. As I recall, he hears voices, too. He was born here in the asylum from a love affair between a resident and one who was in employ. He has come a long way since. A love affair? How was that possible? I mean, who? Wasn't he dropped here? He sat back in the chair, arched his back, and then leaned forward over the table again conspiratorially. It's not something we speak of, nor should you if we want to remain here, he warned. The comment was staggering. What did he mean? I took a breath and dared another question. Did he ever spend time in isolation? In the beginning, yes, there was an incident. I set down my fork and leaned over, intrigued. I see him touching the walls a lot. Why, yes, says he can feel the people here. He said something similar to me before you walked in. Doesn't surprise me in the least, Benedict replied, tugging on the bristly hairs on his cheek. You hear the voices, don't you? My heart stopped in my throat. How is it you... No? Well, word travels fast about the newcomers. It is something different than the monotony of this place. One must be careful not to cut oneself off, cut oneself on the pieces. Just a word of caution. I found the comment strange. Benedict, there you are. You had an appointment with Dr. Marsh. Where have you been? A nurse wearing a black dress with a high collar and a white apron appeared from behind me. Startled, I turned around, her expression not masking her exasperation. Is there still time? He replied. She took a deep breath in and widened her eyes. I suppose you will have to reschedule, but you must do so in person. He's in his office waiting for you. I'd best be off, Benedict said as he rose from the table. He put his shaking hand on top of mine, patted it a few times, and then followed the nurse into the corridor leading to the east wing. I was curious as to why his hand was shaking so. His palms felt sweaty. Instinctually, I wiped the top of my hand in my lap and excused myself from the table. The question I had for Mr. Whitehall popped in my mind, and I cursed myself for getting too sidetracked in the conversation to ask. Then another thought struck me, trumping the previous. I found the stain on the floor in the common room where Silas had been standing. I had an inkling he and I shared the same struggles. He had mentioned he heard them, words. Perhaps it wasn't I was mad. Perhaps I shouldn't fear Silas, rather speak to him about it. The worst that could happen was I could find him truly mad. I wondered if he knew about the stain. If he had been there as long as what Mr. Whitehall said, perhaps he would remember. I had my own theory. The thing about books is how much the imagination goes into it, and how the imagination runs wild while reading them. I had read somewhere of a woman cursed with the ability to read the future. I felt a kind of kinship with her as I read through her story, and it resonated with me. I casually walked to the post Silas had been thumbing, placed a hand on the hard, varnished wood, closed my eyes, and waited. I took a sharp breath. What at first started as a hum of murmuring quickly loudened into a poorly orchestrated cacophony of noise. I heard laughter, flamboyant conversations intermingling with each other, angry voices, and the clang of silver being thrown or jostled about. Moments later it began to pierce my ears, the voices undulating between octaves. The pitches harmonized until they slowly dipped into contrasting tones, which jarred my soul. I could feel the fear rise within the tightness in my chest until it became the familiar lump in the back of my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut and tightened my grip on the pillar, forcing myself to find those moments, the ones Silas had heard. "What have you done?" a woman's voice rang out from the crowd. The mountain of noise settled until I could just barely hear it. "What have you done?" She repeated, her voice cracking. She sounded frantic, desperate. "Help! Come quickly!" I heard a young child cry out. The voices overlapped in a hush before another voice could be clearly heard. "Get it cleaned out before the residents see it. That's all we need. Panic! Or the residents coming up with their own ideas on the matter." "Well, there's that. What should we do with the child?" "There's nowhere else for it to go. Dr. Mansfield specifically stated—" "The child stays," another man finished. "It would cause the asylum to shut down and lose its funding. People aren't going to want their families to stay here with such a scandal blemishing the asylum's good name and standing." "Dr. Mansfield, what are we going to do with the child?" "Call upon a wet nurse in town. Make certain she is of sound mind and can maintain secrecy. She will be paid handsomely. The child is to be placed in the estate wing and must remain there until he becomes of age to where he can be released to mingle with the residents. Be vigilant and keep an eye out." "Why don't we simply send the child away? Find a family to take him in." "The child would only further stain the Brannigan name," he replied, and then cleared his throat. "I have already been in contact with the family, and their wish is for the child to remain here. They are unsure as to whether or not the illness—" His voice grew farther away, so tried to concentrate harder on the sound of his voice until I brought it back. "The child suffers from the same ailments." "I will get things settled," a woman's voice sounded before the voices softened to a hum. A child grew up in the asylum? This place was not for children. I had seen only a few young ones here. A few of them, I heard, were in isolation due to their erratic and violent fits. But the child conceived in this institution was a boy. I could not believe it was possible, and how had this been allowed to happen? My first thought was of Silas. I didn't realize he was as old as he was, considering how childlike he appeared and behaved. He was perhaps not as unsettling as I had previously believed. It was his disability that unnerved me, how different he was from the others I had seen in my brief period in the community. Mr. Whitehall probably knew more than he was letting on, and I was determined to find out what it was. It had to do with the bloodstain covering up the common room. What kind of accident had it been? The stain appeared quite large, as it went far underneath the carpeting than I was able to lift up, so it had to have been something rather grisly. I opened my eyes, looked around me, and casually took my hand from the pillar. He heard the voices, too. Is he trying to show me something? For what purpose? "Here, here, here," a voice echoed in the dining hall. Silas had appeared again at the end of the hallway leading to the pantry area. "Hear them, hear them, hear them," he chanted. I lowered my gaze and found myself out of the dining hall and into the comfort of my private quarters. I passed the common area on my way to my quarters. However, it wasn't as vacant as I had hoped it would be. A few residents shuffled about, most dressed in formal attire as they spoke of politics and the Americas amidst the garish gossip of the women tending to their stitching. I stopped a moment and regarded the area of the carpet hiding the stain. I hung there a moment until I realized I had garnered the attention of some of the residents who had stopped speaking to discern me from the shadowed hallways. I paid them no mind, and instead made my way to the large marble staircase. I admired the gold flecks in the stone as I slowly ambled up to the third floor. I could hear the soft pat of my slippers against the cool, hard surface. What I so desperately needed was a means of escape to clear my thoughts. So the moment I arrived, I quickly pulled out the copy of Lippincot's monthly magazine and stretched out on my bed, flat on my stomach. Ladylike manners were something necessary at this point, I reckoned. There were far more unsightly things in this institution than for one to worry about propriety in the confines of one's private living quarters. I kicked off my slippers and enjoyed in myself the feeling of my legs curled up, the feeling of the cool air against my stockinged legs. A loud screech echoed within the walls as a dumbwaiter was lifted and stopped with a loud report at the left corner of the room. It was time for tea already. I got up quickly, set aside the magazine, and opened the door. I had requested souchong this afternoon as opposed to my standard Earl Grey teas I so enjoyed. If by chance I did not like it, I could ring the bell and send the dumbwaiter back down for something different, though I doubt I was as picky as some. The moment the water hit the tea, my room filled with the scent of a dry hearth, and much to my dismay, it tasted like sausage burned over wood with a slight trace of pine. It wasn't what I expected. It appeared to me more of a tea that should be drank during dinner or perhaps after. Certainly nothing that would complement the taste of breakfast. I tried to liven the flavor with a few lumps of sugar, but the taste was far too strong for my liking. Regrettably, I took the platter with the bite-sized chocolate cakes and placed it upon my dresser, and placed my tea back on the dumbwaiter. I hesitated ringing the bell, but I felt rather parched. I drew up a note to go along with the platter, thanking the kitchen staff for the kindness of their suggestion, and requested something a bit tamer. I opted for Darjeeling, imported from India, a light-colored brew with a floral aroma better suited for my palate. After I had rung the bell, the dumbwaiter slowly descended. It was then I heard a rapping upon my door. Curious as to whom would call upon me, I opened the door without the slightest bit of hesitation. It was Silas. "My word, you have such gumption to visit me here," I fumed. Silas's expression turned sour in his upset as he stuck out his bulbous lower lip. Here, he mumbled, twirling a lock of thin hair between his fingertips. Here. I hadn't intended on scolding him so harshly, but be that as it may, he did arrive uninvited and unannounced to my room. I regarded him a moment as he looked up and down the hallways, his expression rather vexed. "What is it you need, Silas?" I asked, forcing a smile in a calm tone. "Here," he replied. He, for some reason, could not meet my gaze. "What is it you hear?" I asked. Here, he replied, poking at his ears. "Hear them." Regardless as to the proper procedures as residents, Silas was trying to tell me something. The truth felt instinctual. I was overcome suddenly from a feeling of a sort of kinship with this man, who was well older than I. He had the answers, as monosyllabic as he was. I believed he was suffering with the same ailment as I, or rather a similar malady, plagued by the same demons as I had previously thought they were. It was well time I got answers, real answers, that didn't spout from the mouths of those who have not experienced it. Yes, Silas and I had a lot to speak about. It was getting him to talk. Or was that how he was talking to me? Was he already aware of what ailed me, what caused me to be sent here? But how would he know? I quickly ushered an apprehensive Silas into my room, where he continued darting his eyes back across my vast bookshelves. "Mum," he said. No, I am not your mum," I said. "Mum," he said again. "Are you trying to tell me something about your mum?" I asked, pulling up my vanity chair. It was cushioned with a floral design and had ornate roses carved up and down the legs and the back of it, which matched the vanity itself and the accompanying swivel mirror I had demanded to be removed. The same roses that adorn damn near everything in this place. I struggled with it, but I managed. I took a seat across from where he stood. "We haven't much time to speak, Silas. We suffer from the same ailment, don't we? Or at least in some respects." He nodded his head as he chewed on his fingertips. I scooted to the edge of the chair and rested my elbows atop my knees, cradling my head in my hands. "How did you find out?" "Fit," he replied between his fingers, referencing my time in isolation. He still couldn't bring his eyes to meet mine, instead surveying the room as though something was about to come out from the shadows. I nodded. "I see. You hear them, don't you?" I dropped my hand and gestured to the walls. "The voices, they come from them, don't they?" He looked nervously around the room. "Silas, this is vastly important." "'Portant," he replied. "Yes, important," I continued, brushing a stray dark curl. I sat up, placing my palms on the tops of my legs. I wondered what it was about this room in particular that made him appear more reticent than usual. It was much like the other rooms in decor, save for the pleasantries other had brought with them from home or had sent for the estate wing. My room was the exception, save for the majority of my books my husband was kind enough to send. My four-poster bed had seen some use, considering the scuffs and scrapes in the hardwood, but still maintained a beautiful white brocade silk canopy. The rich hardwood bookcases and dresses bore the same swirling designs etched into it as the bed, made to appear like the crashing of waves. The walls were festooned with sconces, candelabras, a crucifix, and a few mirrors I had taken down, leaving behind an outline of where it used to be. I intended to have a few of my paintings from my home sent over, my prior home, but I hadn't had the chance to query Dr. Fontaine about it. Silas stood in the center of the room, shifting his bare feet on the carpet as though it were burning his heels. Flexion, he said. No, I don't much like my reflection. I never told anyone why I hated mirrors so, and Silas seemed the type to keep mum on such a subject. I broke a mirror once when I was but a child. It was on a swivel, much like the one that was on my vanity. It was my mother's. When I was young, I was fascinated by it and rather enjoyed making silly faces at it. I had climbed up on a chair once to get my doll out from behind it. A doll was taken because I was naughty and spoke ill of my mother. I snuck into her room, climbed on the chair, and I lost balance. I fell on top of the mirror, shattering it. The last time I looked into a mirror was that from a shard of that one. I remember turning my head to the side and watching the blood pour from a deep gouge on my forehead. I bent down and showed Silas the scar. And the look my father had when he opened the door behind me, it was of both anger and shock. You see, the wood from the stain had penetrated into my leg. There was blood everywhere. I remember the stain it made on the hardwood. My parents had to cover it up with a rug. I haven't been able to look into one since. Scar, like on floor. Yes, scars on the floor. So you've seen what lay underneath the carpet in the common room. You were trying to show me, weren't you? Show, voice. Yes, I nodded. I heard them. I can hear them all when I touch the walls. Why I hadn't realized it sooner, I am unsure, but it led me to this place, where God wanted me to be. Maybe the good Lord sent me here to help you, Silas. Help, he murmured. Help, 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 he cried as he rocked back and forth. I jumped up and placed my hands upon his quivering shoulders to try and ease his cries before they could be heard. Shh, I'm trying to help. Silas, so you must listen to me. What happened in that room? What is it you're trying to tell me? I'm having a difficult time understanding you. Mum, he replied, but responded behind sobs. Mum, your mum, she was murdered, wasn't she? Papa, your father killed your mum? Who is your father? Where is he? Works, he replied and pointed out to the door. Out. He works outside the asylum? He shook his head and narrowed his eyes in frustration. Out, he said and gestured again. He works here. Is he here now? He bit the sides of his thumb until he pulled a cuticle from his finger. He spat it away and continued gnawing on them. It took him a few moments and a bit of cajoling to get him to respond, but he did so satisfactorily. Once I had the information I needed, I steered Silas to the door with the promise of a game of Ludo and draughts in the evening. By the way he smiled, I knew he was pleased with the idea and even managed to smile. Despite the size of his lips, seeing him smile made my heart warm. Being childlike as he was, I can't imagine it being very difficult for him to smile. But this was the first I had seen it. As I turned to close the door, I poked my head out and watched as he skipped gleefully down the hallway. I don't think I've ever seen that boy so happy before, a woman crooned. I turned my head and saw her ambling slowly with the cane in hand. You're the newcomer, aren't you? Yes, madam. What is he doing on this floor, I wonder? He came to see me. He's not much for talking. I think he may be sweet on you. You are a pretty thing, she replied, and stopped in the hallway to catch her breath. May I assist you? Oh, these bones can still carry me as far as the common room. She smiled and lifted a small leather bag overflowing with yarn and knitting needles. I appreciate the offer, my dear. You go on and have yourself a pleasant day. I'm sure we will talk more as time goes on. I'm Arabella Evans. I know. I'm Luciana Moncroy. I've spent the better part of my life cooped up in here. I much prefer spending my days walking through the gardens, though not in this weather. No, the weather it doesn't seem to be agreeable. Well, it was a pleasure meeting you, Madame Moncroy. The same, she replied, and ambled down the hallway, where she was met with an orderly, the hunchback Mr. Whitehall. He nodded his head in my direction, as did I in return. I realized I could have queried Madame Montcroy about what Silas had revealed to me, but I thought the better of it. It was probably for the best, considering Mr. Whitehall being directly down the hallway waiting to escort her. I imagine. There was one individual I was acquainted with whom I knew I could speak to freely. I made my way down the steps, gave Mr. Whitehall a cursory nod, and began walking the halls in hopes of running into them. It took a while for me to walk the floors, listening to the echoing sound of voices in various rooms. I poked my head into the expansive library that would rival the London Library. It was the first time I had felt as though my time spent here could become fruitful and dare I say pleasurable. The library would have to wait, however, as I had not yet found for whom I was searching. I walked by a few offices and found my way to the east wing, which is where I finally found him. Arabella, what a pleasant surprise! He regarded me with mirthful eyes and a wide, mischievous grin. You may want to take care of this bloke, the man beside him chided, which was met with a stern glare. Mr. Lotway. Please call me Dexter. Mr. Lotway is too formal, don't you think? Especially around this dreadful place. There are enough formalities in the physician's offices, wouldn't you say? I couldn't agree more, I replied, and I couldn't hide my smile. I almost felt as though I were blushing. What can I do for you, Miss Arabella? The other man excused himself and turned the other way, leaving Dexter and me alone to speak. I heard a word of crime committed here, and I implore you, if you have any info... He came around and put his arm about my waist and led me off into a nearby unlocked study. He looked around the room as though frantic and closed the door behind us, just checking to make sure no one is snooping about. Now, what is this bit of intrigue? Mr. Whitehall, can you tell me about him? Yes, that old codger. What has he done this time? Whatever do you mean? I asked. I felt uneasy around Silas, but had a feeling he was merely a harmless child. Mr. Lotway, I didn't know for certain what ails him enough to be sent away. Could he have done something dangerous? Did he have the capacity for murder? I knew nothing of his history and diagnosis. It wasn't ladylike for me to be alone with another man without a chaperone or even an orderly, but my mannerisms have proven the contrary as of late. I chanced fate for the opportunity to speak with them. My need for answers trumped self-preservation. Mr. Lotway, Dexter, I mean. What can you tell me about him? He's a rather squirrely fella, isn't he? Was his response. He leaned back against the wall, pulled a pipe out of his pocket of his trousers, and brandished a Dobinger's lamp with his other hand. I won't tell if you won't, he said with a wink. How did you come by? Isn't that contraband? Only orderlies and staff members are allowed to have such things, and we are to smoke outside with supervision. And how is it this door is unlocked? Indeed, it is contraband, and I have permission to be in here, he replied. But we aren't permitted to... I'm aware, he said, and moved toward the window. He stuck his fingers between the winding wrought iron and finagled his fingers through it until he was touching the window. A moment later, a soft gust of frigid air blew in, sending a chill through the air. The orderlies tend to look the other way when they are promised things. Of what things I was unsure, and the thought made me a bit wary. Being caught smoking without supervision inside of the asylum was forbidden and was a gravely punishable offense. I opted to reassure him I would stay mum on the subject, as I had more pressing matters to contend with. You may think I'm mad, but aren't we all? Have you not seen where you are? I rolled my eyes. You had asked me yesterday what ails me. I took a deep, calming breath and held it for a moment before exhaling. I have heard voices, ones that aren't there. I've only come to realize I'm not quite as mad as I had previously thought, or rather how my husband thought before he had you committed. I saw him when he first brought you here. Richard, if I'm not mistaken? I furrowed my brow with concern. Had he met my husband? I wasn't formally introduced, he went on. He seemed rather affectionate toward you, and I sensed a bit of trepidation on his part in leaving you to the care of strangers. Did he say anything? He didn't need to. He lingered near the entrance for quite a while before he left. He just stood facing the entrance. He made to go back in, I imagine, to fetch you, but thought the better of it and begrudgingly left. Guess the window won't shut. I felt the edges of my lip curl into a smile of both relief and disbelief. So he still cared for me. He almost came back. Almost. My expression fell, my eyes lowered to the floor. Dexter took my hand and placed it under my chin, lifting it until I was looking into his deep blue eyes. Don't fret, my dear. Your husband cares for you a great deal. My family forcefully committed me in here so they could inherit my father's fortune. Out of anger, I snapped, unleashing all my anger onto my eldest brother, who was written out of the will under a certain stipulation. I had to be proven mentally incompetent in order for him to inherit and carry on my father's legacy. He held out his hands. The pipe remained unlit. Thus, I am interred here. I am so regrettably sorry, I managed. It is as it stands. Now you were telling me of these voices you hear? I explained the ones I heard prior to my arrival to the voices I heard upon touching the wall in the common room, the pillar in the dining hall, and the ones I had heard in my isolation room. He nodded and smoked his pipe, careful to blow the smoke out the window, despite it lingering in the air quite a fair amount. I then went on to explain how Silas had fit into each instance, and the shocking revelation from our conversation in my quarters. Dexter nodded his head as he listened intently and was quiet for a moment as he looked thoughtfully toward the courtyard through the foggy window. The blood stain you found underneath the carpet? Is that what it truly is? I asked, shifting my weight. Dexter noted my discomfort and pulled out a chair for me and motioned for me to sit. He pursed his lips together. The answer to your question is yes. It is indeed a bloodstain. I've heard the story myself, though most of it was left for conjecture. What you have told me about what Silas had said leaves no room for question. Mr. Whitehall is his father, isn't he? But what of his mother? Mr. Whitehall told his wife worked here as a nurse. She was a nurse here for many years when Benedict first arrived. Arrived? As in he is a resident? Why, he most certainly is. But he's an orderly, in employ. I felt my mouth drop in shock, the weight of it nearly pulling me to the floor. She could not bear the idea of being pulled away from him, so she got a job working as a nurse so she could be close to him. Benedict is a very dangerously jealous man. He did not hear voices, rather is touched in a different way. He has delusions of grandeur, suffers from mania. From my understanding of the incident, he had conjured a scenario in his mind about the way she cared for the other residents. You see, he arrived at the asylum under the impression he was here for a job working as an orderly. She had informed Dr. Mansfield, the head doctor running the asylum back then, of his affliction and the means by which she made him agreeable to his situation. They had both agreed it was in his best interest they maintained the pretense for posterity. That doesn't make sense. How is he to be treated for his condition if he's not forcibly faced with the reality of his predicament? They believed it was the only means by which he could be treated for his condition. You see, the moment he stepped foot in the asylum, unbeknownst to him, he was spending the rest of his days here. If given the chance, he would revolt. They believed they could go around his delusions by playing into them, thereby treating him, or at the very least, assisting him in maintaining stability. It gave Benedict purpose, and they help him by allowing him to help others. So you're saying he killed his wife out of jealousy? How was it Silas was conceived? They were a married couple. I suppose that makes sense, I replied. But why the secrecy? The voices I heard, they were issuing a warning. A warning you had best abide if what you say is true about your gift. I wouldn't exactly call it that. How is it you believe me? He smirked. I can't be the only sane person around here. It's nice knowing I'm not alone. Besides, God has blessed me with the gift as well. And what might that be? I asked playfully. I know when someone is lying to me, he replied and winked. Why all the secrecy, though? Why wasn't he prosecuted for the murder? Does he even realize what he did? Dexter shook his head gravely. He still believes he sees her walking the hallways and tending to other patients. Look closely the next time you see him. You will notice he isn't imprisoned because this is where he would end up anyway. It doesn't seem fair, I said wearily. None of it ever is. It's not fair to us what happened in our respective lives. We simply have to make do with what we do have. I felt suddenly defeated, and my tone exemplified it. And what is that? Well, I'm not sure how long you will be sojourning here, but for the time being, we have each other. He smoked his pipe as we discussed various topics, and for a time forgot where we were and the circumstances that brought us to the asylum. He did not chide me for the voices I heard, rather never spoke of it again after. We simply enjoyed depth in our conversations that followed, and I was content to consider him a dear friend. After he finished his smoke, we exited the room, leaving the window open to air it out, closing the door behind us. It was nearly the end of our afternoon meal when we finally parted ways. I sat in silence for a good long while as I watched the other residents enjoying light conversations over their meals. After the plates were cleared from the table was when I remembered the tea I had ordered and forgotten on the dumbwaiter. I had gotten so distracted by Silas I could not think of anything else. Then I noticed him sitting in the corner of the room, laughing to himself. Benedict Whitehall, leisurely sitting in a chair in the corner of the room. He appeared to be talking and laughing with someone who wasn't there. He placed a hand where her cheek would be and held it there, cupping it as one would cup a hand over their ear to hear above a noisy crowd. He truly believed she remained here with him. Perhaps her voice did, and he was merely hearing the reverberations from it through the walls. The walls spoke to me as they do to Silas. It was my hope I would never hear her scream. When Silas appeared with the small box and placed it on my table, wearing a smile that would rival any child's, I knew Dexter wasn't the only friend I had made, and for the extent of my stay, I vowed I would play Ludo and draughts with him each evening for as long as I remained. Perhaps I could give him the childhood he so richly deserved. The end. And that is the end of the story. Thank you very much for listening and taking the time to listen to this. And subscribe, leave comments below. Let me know what you think of the story. And I will see you next time. Take care, y'all.